I should say. Yeah. I guess it's my honor and my respect to say that we're all joined here today on unsurrendered land, Algonquin territory, and I just want to make sure that we all acknowledge that. And that's it. That's my part. Right.
Thank you, Bobby. So hey everyone, thank you guys for being here. Just to kind of I think first before anything, we need to introduce our wonderful speaker who is joining us here from Vancouver. So Ann Livingston is the co-founder of VANDU and the Overdose Prevention Society, and I think I speak for more than myself when I say that she's an inspiration and a trailblazer for us in the field of harm reduction and who are advocating for the rights of people who use drugs. And she's involved in mass movement organizing, and yeah, so Ann Livingston, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So just to kind of quickly go over what the format is for tonight, we wanted to kind of create an opportunity for people to ask Ann about all her experience in organizing and social justice. So if anyone has questions, you want to write them down. I'm kind of going to be interviewing Ann throughout the night, and we're going to let her just speak and write and explain her ideas and just kind of learn from her experience. We are filming this. No one's in here is going to be filmed. It's just about here so we can use this for educational purposes. So if anybody doesn't want to be filmed or has any issues with it, just make sure you flag me down and we'll absolutely make sure you are not in the video, but no one will be anyways. Oh yeah, and feel free to grab food from our free table over here. We got donations from Pure Kitchen and stuff, and then we have a bake sale over there in the Naloxone training. And that's all from me.
We have gear.
Yeah, and gear as well, yeah, so please feel free. And we're going to do a 30-minute segment and then a little break and then another 30 minutes.
Gear, not beer.
Gear, yeah, gear, not beer. Okay, yeah.
Oh, I heard
Sorry, I'm not agreed. Okay, yeah, so I guess.
This is turning into an AA meeting.
Sorry, what this time?
I'm in so much trouble with you today.
Yeah, okay. So, first question is, what do you see as the most critical element and ingredient for a successful drug user liberation movement?
Well, what's interesting about drug user liberation generally is that you can be talking only about drug policy, and you can find, I'm sure Keith Richards needs liberation, maybe not. I mean, he did get arrested in Toronto, I think. But, I'm just saying, there's, I think the most important element is that you're organizing on behalf of the most vulnerable, the most likely to be arrested, the most likely to become infected, the most likely to do their full time in jail, the most likely to be rearrested, that you really want to say, if we can make the lives better for the least advantaged, most vulnerable drug users, then you've got a solid drug user movement, liberation movement. Which usually means starting an organization that welcomes people as members and they're not your clients. So it means for someone like me who's an organizer and not a drug user, I mean, I could pose and say I did as much cocaine as I could get a hold of in the 80s or whatever it was. But I'm just saying, or I guess it was the 70s. Anyway, there's a whole reason I would never do that, and that's because I'm trying to say to people who are really at a disadvantage that my middle-class notion of oppression just isn't what we're discussing. What we're really looking at is people who are extremely vulnerable to harm from drugs. And usually it's through criminalization, and it's often through disease, bloodborne pathogens, for instance, quite serious illnesses, and deaths from overdose. So the important part then, the other part that I think had us really look and say, why are we always looking at the most vulnerable, was when you're looking at something like saying we at least need a space, we need to be organized around an issue. The issues that we organized around in Vancouver were overdose first, and it was quickly, very quickly followed by a massive outbreak of HIV/AIDS. I'm going to keep burping because I ate cucumbers. When you go to get something like funding and you want to do a campaign in cooperation with public health and be able to have a space that really has funding in order to do this mass movement, then you need to think strategically about how you're going to get that. You can have user groups meet with absolutely no place to meet and no funding, but it's a lot harder. So if you view the strategy of taking funding from people who are often not your cup of tea, and then you can view it as kind of a subversive thing to do, which is to organize the revolution. Well, you're supposed to be doing this, but they're the same thing. If you look about what will prevent harm from drugs, what will prevent HIV, what will prevent hepatitis C and overdose, you'll find out that it's a more equitable distribution of wealth, which is, I think, pretty radical stuff. So public health people, I'm always surprised that they don't get called communists or something, because it really is, there's no way to get a more equitable distribution of wealth than to really challenge the powers that be. And I don't think that's where you start. You start with this very local understanding. So Bud Osborne and Walter Brueggemann, who's some sort of theologian, he's an old man. Anyway, he says that all resistance movements are fights for land, control over territory. And it's odd that the book ended up being called Fighting for Space, because this is the recurring theme. So if I go to a community that has no drug user group, the first thing we do is we kind of find the village wells. Where are drug users right now? Is it some free breakfast that goes on in a church basement? Because you need to be in touch with them. If you were going to put up a poster somewhere and you wanted every drug user in that town to see it, where would you put that poster? Like I said, we're aiming this at people who are extremely vulnerable and drug users. So you might approach the church and say, could we please have some space, because we want to organize a support group for people who have not been able to succeed at abstinence. And they can kind of go, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea. And if you approach them and say, we're doing a drug users union and we're part of a drug user liberation thing, it might not be what they're going to really fund you to do. And in a sense, you're not lying about what you're saying. Maybe one of the other things I think that is a problem sometimes, if you come in with a lot of theory and you really know about liberation, you know about movements, it's important still to say, what do these guys know about it? What kind of language do they use? What kind of words are they using to describe their oppression? And you need to let them have their own language. And I was getting fights in the downtown east side about the word gentrification. I kept saying, why are we using that word? Why aren't we saying, you live somewhere and they kick you out and move rich people in? That's what everyone knows what it is. And whoever owns the land owned it, and now someone else owns it, and you hate, neither of them were really very friendly. The slumlord that was, killing you with his shitty housing, or now the new guy owns it who's tearing it down. It's quick, choose which one's better. You know what I mean? It's kind of a dilemma. So some of the issues, you need to say, what issues does this group have? So I used a technique of organizing that I learned from these Nicaraguan people that the Vancouver Richmond Health Board brought. I still think it's funny that they did this. I think that Tools for Peace, anyone hear this? It's not in existence anymore. But I thought it was funded by unions. But anyway, they got a grant, and they brought these Nicaraguan people to Vancouver, and then we went to this camp that was unheated in January in White Rock and stayed there for 3 days. They made these, I don't know if you've been around these Latin American organizers, they have these techniques and this theory, and it went on and on and on, and I kept conscientization, and I'm like, who uses that word? What does that mean? Anyway, it was terrific because they are so used to talking about campaigns of what they call peasants. When I said, I don't understand what this word means, they said, Ann, every peasant in Nicaragua gets it. I don't know what your problem is, that kind of thing. So, but it was, what they were teaching us to do is loop back on the organizing. So the first question is, what issues do you have? So you can go basically into anywhere in the world, and what you want to do find first is the most radical people within that. People that are already doing something, that are already opinion leaders, or already got a little bit of, spark, and they really want to do something. And then you start organizing them. And the first thing after you get them pulled together is to start saying, what issues do we have? And then you just keep recording them and recording them and recording them. And pretty soon you start to come into piles. You can sort them. So there'll be police issues. There'll be I don't know, hospital emergency rooms that call you junkie hose and turn you away. And they'll be like, and you'll get these sort of lists of complaints and you can start to put them into categories, because the next step is for the organizer to come back and say, well, you know, if we want to do anything about the emergency room at St. Paul's, we're going to have to go to the board of directors, and I've already made the phone calls, and I'm thinking about. So when you come back as the organizer, you're saying to them, here's the issues I heard you say. First of all, you make sure, is this really what you said? Because you don't want to make any mistakes. It's easy to make mistakes about what you think you heard, because you know, you're not them, so how would you know? But then when you get that all straightened out with the police issues, you say, well, there's a police board, and they meet every 3 months, and there's a public session that we can get up and get on the mic, or, you know what I mean? So you start to teach them about what they've said their issues are, and how you think they fit into, like, why have those issues existed, why have they persisted? Well, the hospital's not accountable to the people they serve. The police are certainly not accountable to the people they serve. And some of the other surprising ones will be the pharmacy that's got kickback schemes going on, or the doctor that won't see people, or the housing that says, or doctors that say, oh, that's your address, a downtown Eastside address. Oh no, we're not taking any new patients. So we get the piles of issues, and they're not hard to find. But the next step is to get them kind of organized into some kind of presentation back to, well, this is what I think you guys said. And then when we go to the third step, which is what action are we going to take, we're not going to make the mistake of taking police issues to the health board, although I do that anyway, just because I think it needs to be revealed to them. But I'm just saying that the next step, when you start to say to people, what action are you going to take, you start to construct the action. And then it's again a thing about not going, you have to go along as the group goes along. If you're more radical than the group, you should just keep quiet about it and watch and see how much leadership they're going to provide to this thing and where their real passion lies. And it will be there, because people have been, you know, people have a fire in their belly. Some of the other work that we never really get to is when you've got groups of people. The story at VANDU was that for 1 year, there was no one who was white on the entire board of VANDU. And there was nobody who was female on the board of VANDU. And for sure, most of the damage was occurring to men. Men were the most abandoned. The women had other women-only programs. But the 60 women were being murdered during this period. Just, I'm saying, it's not like that. But I got curious about it. But instead of saying, okay, well, let's diversify the board by, we'll just grab a woman somewhere and stick her on here, even if she doesn't really want to. It's better to let the movement itself become conscious of its own thing. So it would be a discussion. But when I asked people individually, how come you guys do this work? I was surprised to learn that people who were in Nova Scotia, I think 2 or 3 of them were from Nova Scotia, and they were black, and they were in Vancouver, and when they heard about this thing, boy, they weren't letting go of it. One of the reasons they told me they kept coming back was after we got the funding, they were sure that I was lying to them, and that I was just going to give myself huge wages, and that I was just going to offer them coffee and a drop-in, which didn't happen, but they were just waiting, you know. So they said, why'd you come back every week? Oh, we knew you were up to something. So anyway, I kept passing the test somehow. But when I said to them, why do you know about how to construct a resistance movement? They said, because of Martin Luther King and the whole civil rights thing in the United States. I said, in Nova Scotia? He said, everyone who was black in his community, they were poor as dirt, whether they had a TV or a radio or a phone or whatever, but he said there was a network and the place was abuzz with these kinds of... So people have their own history of knowledge of what a resistance movement is. And Native people that came had their own thing, and then white people who came, they talk about unions and this and that, and these other struggles that they had known about or were in their families. So it was a very, I think you need to be aware of that when you're organizing with people, because they can become leaders, and it's interesting for people to, like, sometimes it's mysterious. Other people come because frankly, they want a job, and they can see that this is going to go somewhere, and they're going to pursue it, and they're going to get a job. And some of them did, and I've never discouraged them. So anyway, what was I talking about again? So in terms of the organizing, when you go to do the action, then there's the construction of the action. What purpose does it have? So the very early actions at VANDU were always based on rooms full of drug users, and then they'd get up and they'd say, you know, people knew that the places we lived in, I'm better off in jail. The toilet's plugged at the end of the hall always. There's bugs everywhere in here. The lab, you know, I mean, just these awful conditions they were living in. And they said if Canadians knew this, they would be outraged. So we need to tell the general population what's happening to us in this neighborhood. And the overdoses, and like it was a very difficult situation. So the first actions they would plan would be to do something, call the press, we'll have a march, we'll have a press release, and then we would spend weeks and weeks planning these things. And this is part of the story, I would say, you guys have already heard this story. Anyway, the thing they would say is, well, we might get tear gassed, and what if this, and they'd get into this huge, long discussion about what was going to happen at this, you know, demonstration. And I'd say, well, you know, I've been to demonstrations, not my favorite thing, but you gotta do what you gotta do. And I've never actually seen any of that happen. And you know, maybe 20 times I've done this. And I'm saying, you know, you guys scored drugs 3 times a day, and I can't tell you anything that would terrify me more than approaching the coroner and trying to be furtive and secretly, you know what I mean? So it was an interesting exchange of what they were worried about, because it was new territory for them. And so we would go ahead and do the demonstration, and then after it was over, what do? How did that go? You know, there's an analysis and a kind of, do you think it went well, what went wrong, what could we have done better? And then we're back to square one with what are the issues. And after a while, we just started to make a big list on the wall of stuff we were going to get to, so we didn't forget. And so people didn't keep telling us what to do. There's a tendency in a lot of this early work where everyone has great ideas, but we need to start getting people to understand that we're not that short of ideas. We're a little short. What we really want to do is be able to follow through on them. Some of the actions were so simple. I'd make a phone call to a methadone clinic, or I'd make a phone call to a hospital or a doctor, and it would resolve the issue for the person. But without that phone call, it wouldn't. So we started to build up a reputation about handling things. And I think the important thing is you always stick with the evidence. That was the other part of coming back to drug users with issues. If it's you know, studies that you're reading, then you start bringing them. Always bring a full copy of the study. You never know, there's some guy in your group with a PhD, or, you know, I mean, some people can really read really complicated scientific studies, so make sure that's there. But also have a kind of presentation of what they've been studying you in this neighborhood, I'd say, and this is what they're saying. What do you think? And so they start to become very well educated about their own issues in their own neighborhoods. They'll know what the rate of AIDS is, they'll know the rate of Hep C, they'll know how many overdoses there were. And so they're starting to follow along on the issues that relate to their own health. And it just, it starts to just take off on its own to some extent. There's lots of pitfalls and lots of difficulties and lots of chaos. I think the other thing that you establish very, very early, at the beginning of organizing, often people are very friendly and everything's going really well, so people say, no, we don't really need to create a group, and we don't really need to have a board, and we don't really need to elect them, and we don't really need to have a constitution and bylaws. And I kept saying, oh, well, we have to have that or we can't get funding. This is law in British Columbia that you can't give funding to a group that doesn't have a registered nonprofit society that's incorporated and up to date. So that was a premise, one of the premises. But the other thing that was important is while everyone was getting along, it took us 8 months to write our constitution and bylaws. And the group was every Saturday at 2 o'clock, and there was $3. And it was a big fight to get the $3, but then whatever, I'm sure people are it's getting easier to be able to hand poor people money who attend meetings, who would normally be out picking cigarettes off the sidewalk or standing in food lineups. Your organizing shouldn't be causing health problems to the people you're organizing, especially when you're doing it with health money. So that was my reasoning, and I fought those fights successfully, but they were quite a repeated thing. You know, you're giving money to drug users and they're going to buy drugs, and I was like, you bought any drugs lately? Like $3? Are you sure? You cheap bastards. You know, and the richer they were, the more shocked they were that you were giving free money to people, and they're just there for the $3. I'm thinking, I'm not sure I'm not sure. But anyway, so, and the group itself used to have this raging debate about the $3. There's people here just for the $3. And I used to just think, I am going to light myself on fire if we have to talk about this again. And then I just suddenly realized that you can be in a group of people, and there's going to be one person at a time. We often did go-rounds, you to you to you, like I would have done that today, so made you all introduce yourselves. Anyway, that's the kind of way we start the meetings. And often if we're doing an issues-related thing, and we want to hear from a lot of people, and then I scribble notes madly, you know, and try to, when you're doing one of your issues, you are doing that, you really are taking notes. But I realized that that's a really safe topic. Should we give out $3 or not? And if you've never spoken publicly in a group of people, you don't have to go, oh yeah, I know about the hair prescription program, like you don't have to be someone who's like, knows everything. Everyone's got an opinion about $3, and it's valid. So that's when this kept going on and on, I finally went, oh, I see what's going on. This is the part where I just click it off and go, oh yeah, let's talk about $3 then, next, and I try and set the time limit until here. And then at the end they go, well, I mean, every now and then they discontinue the money, and then they would recontinue it. But there's always somebody who really did take the bus there and needs the $3. So it's like, you know, whatever. And if you look at the budget, that was always the other thing we would do is complete transparency is just shocking to people. You go, oh, we just got $50,000. So here's how it's being spent. And you lay it out. And then when they did elect their board was constantly reviewing the financials. So that if, you know, you have a methadone meeting and they have a lower attendance, you know, there's a little bit of extra money. Our budgets look like this, $3 times 30 times 52 weeks equals, that's how much funding you know what I mean? It was pretty simple stuff. But they started to have an understanding of how you could construct a budget like that, and it starts to sink in. It also brings forward situations like, we're starting this group, and it's on tomorrow at 2, and you can go to the bank and get us money, and we're paying ourselves $10 for attending it, and then they start the meeting, end it in 15 minutes, and turn to me and say, now you need to pay us out. And I'd just be like, fuming. So I go, yeah, okay, and I just pay them all out, and then we would review it. How much did that cost us? If we did that every week, what would happen to the rest of our budget? So then they would have a finance committee who had to review expenditures beyond a certain amount, right? So then there's someone else there. Like if they said it's the something or other group, the other people can go, wait a minute, I don't have a group. So you get this, not sibling rivalry exactly, but a kind of calling to a higher purpose. But it is important to let people kind of blunder along and make mistakes. That's one of the things, you know, it's like, the great thing about the group too is that we have 52 meetings a week, 52 meetings a year for the board once the board was elected, and it's only 40 now because, anyway, the welfare week isn't a good time to hold the meetings. We've discovered people have been awake for 3 or 4 days, they'd come into a meeting, they'd all call each other names and swear a lot, and then cry, and then because they have been awake for so long, and by the time they'd all apologize, we'd have another one like that. I just go, look, why don't we just cancel that one? And because you're really at the mercy of the drugs that are on the street and what's going on the street, so it varies. Anyway, that's sort of an aside. But the thing about the meeting every week allows you to say, the board's having a robust discussion, is making a decision, and they want to do something. You go, yeah, sure. They're all, you know, it passes. And then you can say, especially if I'm like, oh, this is a bad idea. Anyway, I might even tell them I think it's a bad idea, but I also say, no, we'll put it in, but then you get to review it. So you can make the motion say, for a trial period of 6 weeks, we're going to do blah, and it will be reviewed at that board meeting. But you can often see it going off the rails even before that, because they're meeting every week. And there's a kind of introspection. And the board meetings were to review. We would have a very structured kind of thing came out in the end. Mondays, I VANDU to this day, Mondays is the drinkers meeting. So the drinker story was thus. These guys that drink would come in, they also smoke rock. They smoke rock at the beginning of the month and drink, and then they run out of money and they just keep drinking. And they're drinking like hand sanitizer and like non-potable alcohol, extremely high risk activity. and they loved our group. We were trying to pick people out that were drunk once, and they were hanging on to the legs of chairs, being pulled out of the room. I'm like, oh my God, we're not doing this again. But it was giving them their own group. But you get this debate similar to the $3, and the whole thing would go around them, what do you think? And they'd say, damn drugs, they're drugs legal. We're really up against it. We're criminalized. We shouldn't let drugs in our group, drinkers or whatever. So this whole raging debate would take place, and it would go on for 15 or 20 minutes, and finally someone would get up with tears streaming down the mouth, very moving, and say, we're not treating those guys the way we've been treated. And then they hold the vote, and people would say, yeah, we'll let them in, but they have to behave. And they would really, and the drinkers really responded to this because they were welcome. And then eventually we ended up with a program for people drinking non-potable alcohol. If you go to VANDU today, you can go between certain hours, I don't remember the hours, you can go in there and say, can I have a sherry? And you can buy a potable alcohol that we're selling at cost that we keep in a safe, because we started this sort of alcohol exchange. You guys they've had them back east for ages. I thought, it's in Toronto, Seton House, I don't know. Anyway, these proper alcohol programs, it's finally going in, but these are way back in the 90s, there was nothing on. Anyway, so I'm just saying, you get these. So Mondays was drinkers, Tuesdays is the action group, Wednesdays is the methadone group, Thursdays is the board meeting, Fridays the Western Aboriginal Harm Reduction Society, which is people who are drug users who are Aboriginal or Indigenous or First Nations. And then on Saturday, we had a group for people who had survived the heroin prescription program. So they were called the NPA, which is a joke because the most right-wing party in civic politics was the NPA. It was the Naomi Patients Association. And then they started Salome, so then they were the Salome Naomi Association of Patients, or SNAP. So SNAP is on Saturdays, and they're really a subgroup of the methadone group. And they were prepared, all of these groups developed to the point where they're thinking about, with the heroin trial, for instance, they were put on heroin, they had to have failed at methadone at least twice, and you had to prove it. You had to have the paper. So people were, anyway, it was a very rigorous process. And then at the end of the trial, after, I don't know if it was a year, let's say it was a year, you got heroin prescribed to you. At the end of the trial, they just offered you methadone, which you had failed at twice. Some people, of course, did okay and they went back on methadone, but a whole mess of them went right back to the street. So they were mad as hell. And I kept saying, I'm pretty sure this is illegal. This is a violation. So anyway, they have their own story to tell, but they were starting to pull together a legal strategy to sue the government because it was violating the Helsinki Agreement or something, which is this human subjects of scientific studies have to be decent. You can't just take people and study them and then just boot them to the curb when you're done. Thanks a lot. See you later. So they were being a little threatening that way, and it has succeeded. That there was both of those studies are now over, and they're actually prescribed heroin. So that's the week at VANDU, and then Sundays we're finally not doing anything. And then, so those are some of each one of the groups is an organic creation. So as I'd say, don't solve problems you don't have. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't necessarily make a women's group until you go, hey, we better start a women's group. So one of the outcomes of having all these men on the board was that we said, we applied for a grant. Status of Women kept getting disfunded, but we got this teeny grant when they weren't disfunded one year, and they said the description was to create leadership in the harm reduction movement amongst women in Vancouver. And then we started having boards that had a majority of women. So it has its, instead of panicking that you don't have enough of a diverse board, it's a discussion at the board, especially as the AGM's approaching. What can we do? Is there a reason women don't come here? Like maybe you guys are really, really sexist and making snide remarks. Brian was president. Every time he'd see a woman who was quite good looking, go, I think I'm in love. That was his opening line. I was like, yeah, Brian, that might just be a bit of a thing. But anyway, so as more women get involved, of course, some of the behavior tones down, but I just encourage what do we call it? It's kind of an odd thing to refer to, but it's called group conscience. Does anyone know what this means? The Quakers use it. But once a week to decide who's doing what at what time with who. And now we're running an overdose prevention site, so there's lots of shifts to fill. Anyway, everyone would pass this unanimously, no advances, no exceptions. If Ann or any employee gives anyone an advance and they don't do their job or they leave, tough luck, it's her loss. You will personally take that loss. And then, after the meeting's over, I swear, in 15 minutes, almost the whole board will come up and ask you for an advance. And you're thinking, I'm pretty sure that's what you mean by group conscience. So there's a kind of way that people are held to their higher selves. I don't know what you mean by this, but human beings are very ethical, and they're ethical in groups. And once they've got a mission, and they belong, and they are important, and they are able to have disagreements or express their opinions, or to have the power to initiate an entire, like you could start the methadone group, or you could start the women's group. You know what I mean? So that's a pretty powerful thing, and that means that entire time people are partaking in that activity. This has been my observation, and you can read about group conscience. I don't know if the Quakers write things down. Have everyone been to a Quaker meeting? Everyone just sits in silence. I'm not kidding. Anyway, and that's the service. Anyway, so, and then if you're moved to say something, you say it, and they call it the decisions made. I think they use group conscience maybe in 12-step as well. But anyway, it's this, because other people used to say to us, oh, they're a bunch of junkies. They're just going to steal all the money and go buy dope and blah. You know what I mean? Well, I was like, and how do they ever get anything done? And I said, well, they use a lot of cocaine, that helps. But I mean, there's a kind of, you know what I mean? And I don't mean it in a derogatory manner. There was a real sort of fueling, and people could, you weren't put down for using drugs. You were just, and at these advances thing, I was always willing to lose the 10 or 20 bucks, especially if someone was like sweating and total withdrawal. And at the beginning of the shift, you just go, take your money and don't fuck with me. Just so you know, it's my personal loss if you don't come back. And then I used to do this. And you can't quit the group because you owe me money. Is that clear? You got it? You're coming back. So, because you don't want to lose members either. You can lose some really, really good people that way.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Ann. Yeah, this one, okay, so this is kind of relevant to like burnout, and I think something that a lot of us would probably relate to. What has sustained your work? What has sustained your work over these years, and particularly throughout the past 2 years?
Well, this is a really interesting problem because we've got now a mobile unit, they call them. I don't know why they're called. I think they call it that. And they're supposed to be going to anyone who's working the front lines, because the overdoses in Vancouver, we lost 1,400 people in the province, 350 in Vancouver. And a ton of them, of course, are in the neighborhood. And then people are just reviving people. I think for each dead person, you've got something like 30 non-fatal overdoses. So anyway, I think that if you're working in social justice, you're less vulnerable to burnout than if you're a service provider. And I love a discussion with people about this. And other than that, I don't know, they kept coming to us with these, what I call middle-class notions of trauma, debriefing and stuff. So the very first people who were in the paper saying they were burnt out and it was very upsetting to them were the ambulance drivers. And I'm like, you kidding me? You guys got good pay and you got a union. Like, take us to your union. Like, why is this now the topic of the town? Oh, we have to revive the same guy twice in the same day. It's so hard on us. And I'm like, hey, that might be your, like, so, and I'm not saying, I've been at accident scenes. I've seen what those guys deal with. So, and I mean not an overdose, but some kind of horrible crushing thing with the human being involved. Like, you know, there's stuff. So I wasn't completely clear. And then I'll quote Erica Thompson. As Erica said, she's a very experienced person who's been a drug user for a long time, got straight in a 12-step, is now a peer coordinator for Fraser, and she sits in the room, like, we have these conferences with all these drug users there. Oh my God. Fear and loathing at the motel. And there's this kind of, we try and make a hospitality suite because we're saying, look, we're not finding any dead people in these rooms. Like, if you're coming to this thing, everyone's on alert. We're not having that happen to us. Is that clear? But she'll be in the room with everyone using all the time. And she's like, you know, calling the dealer and making sure there's good drugs there. Because if you hold a sort of conference for people who use drugs in a town, they all just start wandering away, trying to find dope in that town. And you're going, hey, where is everybody? We're trying to hold a meeting here. So you're better off to have a strategy. Anyway, so Erica's an extremely rare individual. And she finally said to these people in this meeting, I actually don't experience trauma because I have a Narcan kit. What I came from, I've got my kid in the next room, I got a guy going down, he's 200 pounds, I'm trying to pick him up, which is not very big, and I've got to revive him because if I call 911, they're going to take my child away from me. And, you know, they somehow got the guy revived with no Narcan. She says, I'm not traumatized now. I was traumatized back then. So I don't know if it's helping, but we're still working on this as what helps with making sure you don't get trauma. Here's the thing I think works. If you know, like, I think that there's some, if you actually look up trauma in all these textbooks and see what people are talking about, it's a time when you are completely helpless and things are happening to you and you can't do anything about it. And that's trauma. And that's why children experience it, because they're so powerless. So one of the things that helps us is that we can get together, we can find time to talk to each other, we can stand where we are and think where we were before and feel that we're getting somewhere, which isn't all the time, I can tell you, but you know what I mean, that we did get the OPS legalized and we did, you know what I mean, there's this, and I think that's why as an activist or someone in a liberation movement, you're feeling less trauma than somebody who just wakes up every day and has to roll the rock to the top of the hill only to have it roll back down. And if you're confined by your service provider, the people you work for, and you're terrified that if you get caught, I don't know, fraternizing with the clients, or like there's a lot more very confining things put on people who have a job description and a job than there is people who are activists. We kind of make it up as we go along, and then I think there's less helplessness if you can see forward. And even when some people die, you have this sadness and you have the way to mourn their loss. And the things that would help a lot more would be a memorial and the name somewhere, because in the groups now, people are going, I stand here at the end of every group, every meeting at VANDU, and now all of the user groups are doing this. And I didn't start it, I'm just saying. Somebody just started doing this, and then it became a tradition. We're having a moment of silence to remember the people who have died. And then people just call out names of their friends who have died. And then now a couple of people go, I just am so upset because I'm trying to call out names and I can't remember their names. And there's a feeling that, you know, you're loyal. Oh, you can't remember their name, it's so awful. So those are some of the other things, is memorials I think will help reduce trauma. But this feeling that we're part of something, we're in it together, and that when we lose people, we honor them forever. One of the things that VANDU does, and first it had a very practical reason, we would leave their names on the membership list. So early on at VANDU, I remember taking people's names off the membership list, and then they'd walk in, and I'd say, someone else said you were dead. Don't ever greet anyone that way in this movement. It's not a positive interaction. They don't think it's funny. And anyway, so we started just leaving everyone a name on the list, and then Bud was doing this whole, Bud Osborne's a poet, he co-founded VANDU, and he used to read millions of books. He passed away in, I think, 2014. Anyway, he said, in Haiti, people's relationship with the dead is similar to people's relationship with the non-dead. And that in a way, people that are dead are, I don't know, he didn't say alive exactly, but it's not like you know, you go, oh, there's the dead ones, we take them off the list, they're not with us anymore. There was a sense that they're still with us. So that's one of the traditions, I think, and I think that helps. I think it's an interesting, funny, odd tradition. to have 2,000 people's names on your list, and I've never counted. Because you know what else? We can't get the real names of the real dead anyway. I don't know if you've ever tried to get the name of a dead person from the coroner. I sort of know how to do it. Yeah, if you know their first, middle, and last name and their date of birth, they have to give it to you. It's public. But if you're kind of, you have a street name or you're not sure, it gets a lot harder. But the other thing VANDU doesn't do is keep very good records, because the laws on the laws about confidentiality and keeping records are very strict. So if you have them in a computer, then you have to keep it double locked. I don't know, does anyone know this stuff? You have to make it so it's hard. If someone just breaks into your office and downloads your membership list, that's not good. So, and that's the other thing about our group, is we always say users and former users. Partly because people, they don't stay quit and they don't stay using. It's very common for people to be going in and out. And it also protects their anonymity. Because if they're using, frankly, it's not anyone's business. You know, if your landlord sees you on TV and you're the president of VANDU, they go, oh, you're a user. And things, you know, things can build up for you. Where we just get users and former users. And I don't know how many, who knows? There could be no former users for all I know. But as I say, people either use drugs or they don't. And that's not the issue. So the other thing that's very puzzling when you come into VANDU, almost never are people talking about their personal drug use in the kind of actual, you know, if we had a meeting, who would be talking about their personal drug use? They do enough of that everywhere else. It's all they talk about, the drug users. When we're at VANDU, we're talking about who's going to the meeting next week with the minister of something or other, and who's going to be there, and what about this? You know, you've got all this really work to do, and it really, I don't know if they use less drugs. I used to think, how could they possibly have time to use as much drugs as they used to use, since they're in here 40 hours a week? But I don't dare challenge that, because boy, drug users are impressive. They can use a lot of drugs, and a very short, you know, something like, I don't know, don't go there. So that's why I sort of just stay out of it. Because I think in our lives, or anybody's lives, no one says, how much wine do you drink in a week? And that's a big consideration about whether they're going to hire you or not. Obviously, if you're drunk at work, you're probably not going to do a job, and there's going to be a reason you're fired. But in terms of leading with well, you hired me, this is what Brian used to say it, but he got a job at the injection site. They went to open the injection site, and they had hired no drug users. So Dean Wilson, I don't know if you've met Dean, he's always kicking doors in, and he's going to do whatever. He said, we're going to pick it the first day if you don't hire drug users. So you're going to have this grand opening, and we'll be outside with placards. So you better hire some damn drug users. And so they did, and they work in the chill room, and Brian was one of them. And at some point, he's working alongside union members who are getting advancement. He's still on the same shitty stipend or wages or whatever it was. We negotiated that anyone in treatment could get their methadone for free, because after all, it is the health board, and they can bloody well pay for it. But the politics between people who aren't in the union to people who are in the union, I really respect the fact that the union has to go with seniority, and someone could bump someone out of a peer position. And the peer position still has to be respected. So it was a very awkward thing. So we went to organize an association of experiential workers, or whatever it was. And Brian kept saying, yeah, but they hired me because I'm a junkie. And I'm like, shut the fuck up, Brian. You just have to say these words. I have that experience in my life, and I'm qualified for this position. And just, yeah, play it. Forget that. Who talks like this? Don't ever say that. Don't ever give them that. They'll know if you're looking a little rough, and you'll still do your job. The real interesting thing about having the experiential workers in the chill lounge, Insight was the most highly medicalized, over-controlled, exemptions 10 ways from Sundays, nurses union, nurses association, protocols. I mean, I swear you could fill up a room with this, you know, what is it, scrubbable paint, and what color is it, and how tall are the garbage cans? They just drive you nuts with this bullshit. And but that's fine. That's what we got, and you know, that's a good thing. It was a huge political victory. But they wouldn't allow any of these experiential workers to ever be in the injection room. You're not allowed to speak to anyone else in the. or be seen to hand thing from one person to another. Anyway, it was what we got. So, and you know, I'm not saying it was bad, it was a great thing. But if they really had a hard time, and there's some interesting people that they would occupy an injection booth and they would never leave. And there's a lineup, and then the worker would kind of, you know, I was thinking, you know, like maybe I could help you get all this stuff you laid out here back into your bag. You know, this kind of cajoling along, and they realize they're not going to get anywhere. They'd sometimes go get the peers out of the chill lounge and take them back in, and because they might have a relationship with them already. The other thing is they know politics about violent, what would they be, enforcers, people who collect debts. And that street knowledge is very, very important because, you know, you don't know that yourself. And they can say, hey, 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 and they can just, you know, be alert. And then they might warn other people. But, I mean, I don't know how often it comes up. It's a good thing to know. Someone ran into, we had a little, what was it called? The health, some other health project across the road, and someone ran in with a knife and stabbed a guy right in the place, and pretty soon it was all buzzers and fucking camera, like whatever. So, but anyone who was a peer would have seen that happening, because that guy that got stabbed was the kind of guy that you'd probably want to stab too. Anyway, just saying. There's a certain, anyway, just saying, it was an awkward thing. Not that I'm promoting stabbing, I'm just saying. It was because the people who were running the place didn't have a clue about the guy. And then, anyway, they shut that place down eventually. It just lost its funding. It didn't go anymore.
Yeah. That's great.
So maybe we can like give everybody like a 10-minute break if you guys want to grab some food or like bake sale or smoke or whatever, and then we can kind of start back up. And yeah, here's some more from Ann. Thanks, guys.